afternoon. Welcome to the Dear Abby Dolliver Show. We're so pleased to be back this school year after the summer that we've had. I'm happy to have Joe Stefon with me, my co-host, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and our guest today, who is the Master Scientist. And so I'm going to ask Mrs. Gresko to tell us a little bit about your background and what our topic will be for our show today.
Sure. Our topic for the show today is STEM in science education in Norwich Public Schools. And my role is the district science coordinator. And so I've taught in Norwich Public Schools for 7 years. And before that, I worked for Yale University, first for the Peabody Museum. And then I was offered and accepted a position with the director of transplant hepatology. So I worked in a research lab and eventually saw other opportunities in education and moved over to Norwich Public Schools.
Well, we are very glad that you did. And we are also pleased that we have been able to reinstate our science coordinator position and that you are in that role. So talk a little bit about what that role might mean to you.
Sure. I work with all the teachers in the district to try and facilitate and help them bring science education to all of our students from K to 8. It looks different depending on the school and the needs. I work to bring grants and programs and opportunities to enrich the science education. I also work very closely with technology and the math coordinator, Jill Bissett, to try and tie it all together so that they're getting a full, well-rounded education.
That's great. And I know that we are always talking about our standards, whether in language arts or math and science. There's next generation science standards. We have to live and teach to them. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can explain to our listeners what that might look like or what that means.
Sure. Connecticut right now is in the pre-adoption stage, so we're looking to adopt the next generation science standards around January. These will have 3 different components. There's the disciplinary core ideas. These are what we're familiar with in science, so this is our content. You have your life sciences, you have your earth and space sciences, and you have your physical. Those are the ones we're familiar with that when we teach, we look for the content. What's being added and changed would be the science and engineering practices, and we're also looking at the cross-cutting concepts. The science and engineering practices work on asking those questions and problem solving, critically thinking, analyzing a situation, applying skills. So there's a lot to the science and engineering practices, which is where we're starting to receive training and professional development.
Are those practices at all grade levels?
At all grade levels, but there's a sequence. Mm-hmm. And so as you progress up, so in kindergarten, you'll start asking questions and looking at the world around you to try and understand it. And as you go from kindergarten to 8th grade, you're going to slowly progress and ask larger questions, and you're going to seek out answers to problems.
So it's really teaching students how to think.
How to think.
Critically think.
Mm-hmm, how to critically think and how to answer the questions that will help them understand the world around them and solve larger problems as they become adults.
And it also gives the opportunity for you to work with the language arts folks. Yep. In math, maybe even social studies, because we're trying to get away from that whole silo effect of teaching science separately and then math separately. And we've already begun conversations with Jill and Darcy and Christy about joining them and doing some training for teachers, especially at the middle school level, who are more content than, the other areas.
Yeah, and we started doing that already with our PLCs, our professional learning communities, when the teachers come together. So our math and science are already starting working closely together, just because those two, they feel comfortable with each other. Social studies ties in very easily. I feel like at the elementary level, the teachers that are very comfortable with the content in science have already been doing that with their classrooms. So we're just going to start to branch out on that.
When I think about integrating units of study in all of our content areas, teachers have to be so comfortable in their own content area and then allow you in to help integrate science into reading or writing or math. So how do you approach that as the coordinator?
Yep. So we have actually sought out professional development. We have 3 phases of professional development for our teachers, K through 8. We're applying for the MSP grant, which will provide professional development for NGSS. It's a 3-year grant.
Can you talk about what MSP means and the other acronym, just so.
Sorry. So it's the Math Science Partnership, and it's with the Connecticut State Department of Education and Learn, our RESC. And so we're hoping that by working with them, we'll create this professional development that will teach our teachers how to teach science.
Great.
Where there's a lot of shifts in how we'll be teaching. Right now we have, with the current standards, it's mostly content and teacher driven. With the next generation science standards, we need to learn how do we teach and then step back to allow the kids to kind of direct where we go with the information and guide our instruction. But it takes a lot of understanding of the content and instructional strategies to get the students where you need to get them.
Can you just add a little more to
Yep.
that so our listeners know? So you sought out teachers to
Yep.
be part of this, to participate in this grant, and administrators. So should we be approved, what are the next steps with that?
Great. So we have 18 teachers from our district, and starting next summer,
And everybody volunteered to be part of this
they
grant?
all volunteered to be part of
great.
this grant. And starting next summer, there'll be a 5-day institute. And during this institute, they're going to be introduced to the next generation science standards, which if Connecticut has adopted, it will be their standards, which will be exciting. They're going to get trained starting in the summer, and then it's a blended module, so they'll be working online. They'll also have small study groups that they'll meet throughout the year, and they'll do this in their schools, which is why we tried to have 2 teachers minimum from every school to participate. We also have the administrators, the principals participating, 4 of them, and they'll participate in for 2 days for institute in the summer. So they'll also know how do you support the teachers as they go for the next 3 years. I'm also partaking, but I'm being trained on how to coach them for the next 3 years.
Great.
So we have 3 parts to it. So it's a 4-year rollout with the next generation science standards. So we'll be prepared. We're ahead of the game.
That's great.
Is there an amount, if we get approved, that the district would see, or is it an amount for the region?
It's an amount for the region. They're only allowing so many teachers, but we're trying to expand how many. It was originally written for about 25, but we've asked that they include more teachers. That being said, we are asking for 18 of those positions.
That's great.
Good.
Out of the region.
Yeah, at the region.
You know, I think a lot about when we go into classrooms and we see students actively learning, much more so than before, in any content area. So the students are on the floor together reading to each other or writing or sharing their work, doing math. So how will it look when they're really actively involved in science at various grade levels?
Sure. At all levels, we like to think of science as a team sport. It's not an activity that you're doing by yourself. So the teacher will show them some form of phenomena, whether it be, like a storm forming, or if you're looking at water, even just water dropping, like you're just spilling water. It's to understand the world around you, so you're going to ask questions. The teacher will ask a question, and then the students start to, from that question, they are able to develop many questions. And from those questions, the teacher now has a list of questions that she's going to help get the students to the conclusion. So in a small group, you'll have kids that are doing different parts of the lab. So if you're looking at butterflies in the life cycle, you might first start to wonder, well, what kind of cycles, what does cycle mean? What does it look like? What kind of cycles do we see? That would be the cross-cutting concept. And as we move through the cross-cutting concept, you're going to have the students doing different activities. So you might have a group of students over here doing one activity to help answer the part of that problem, and the group over here. In the end, they collaborate together and say, this is what I've discovered. And together they're trying to solve the bigger question, and then they apply it in the end, you really never solve any problem completely. You just end up coming up with new questions, for a new problem.
that are deeper.
That are deeper.
Hopefully, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I'll play devil's advocate. Why don't we just have a textbook?
Okay, so textbook
When I
serves
was
a
a kid,
purpose.
we did.
Yep, it serves a purpose. A textbook is a great resource to have for rote information, memorization, if you need some reinforcement of a concept. But when we're learning, memorization, those tidbits, it's like a seed. We put it in our brain, but we have to remember where we planted them. Otherwise, it's hard to pull it up. If we are actively engaged in an activity with our hands and our mind, and you have rationalized and understand why this is occurring, you will be able to pull up that information over and over again in different content. Because if I understand how a hurricane forms in science class, and I really understand it, and I'm able to argue from all sides of it, when I go to social studies class and they explain the impact of it, I'm now able to understand all sides of a picture. So in a textbook, you don't get all sides.
And you use the word rote memorization, which is, when I first started teaching many years ago, that's really, science and social studies were really just another form of reading class, because the students read, they answered questions, they did vocabulary, but as far as, interactive learning and thinking, higher level thinking, and just the collaboration, because nowadays we are expected to, we meaning the students are expected when they get a job, that there'll be more collaboration and less working by yourself. And it's the same thing we always say to teachers, don't go in your classroom and close the door. More minds are better.
Yep.
So.
And with STEM education, with the science, technology, engineering, and math, we're looking at a workforce that it's supposed to increase by 20% every few years, the STEM force. So we need to prepare our students, even up to 8th grade, to start looking at those careers that are in those fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, to solve the world's problems that we can't even identify at this point. So if we're able to prepare them when they get to high school, they're able to tackle the larger questions, and then college, hopefully they'll consider careers in those fields.
Not today, but in some past meetings that we've had in recent weeks, you've talked about the engineering part of STEM, and are we expecting our students to be engineers and build skyscrapers and boats?
I'd like to
And
think
how do we build that?
Right. I think that we can, for engineering purposes, we expect them to partake in the engineering process. We're partnering with the Connecticut Invention Convention, and they're also helping support that process. Engineering is where you're addressing a problem, looking at it from all angles, working together to find a solution, and then when it doesn't work, you don't stop. You just continue to find ways to improve it or change it. It's very similar with Common Core's, the idea of growth mindset, that it's a constant change. We're all working to become better.
I guess what stuck out to me when you talked about you're looking for a solution, and if it doesn't work, then you keep looking. And some of that perspective that we are trying to instill in our students is, don't give up. So it's not just saying, I can't do it or I don't know.
Yep.
It's digging to other levels or discussing together. So to go into a classroom now, it's not necessarily that we see the students sitting in rows, no talking.
Yeah.
You go into classrooms now, there's a lot more conversation, and we're encouraging that. So how do you encourage students to think longer and harder to get the solution?
Well, I think that it's important at the beginning of the year. I always had my classroom in a U shape or a circle. I don't stand in front of my classroom. I feel like I became part of my classroom. This was a journey, and we were all about to take it together. I think by making students feel safe in their classroom to be able to fail, they're willing to keep up with the rigorous questioning, and that needs to happen in order for that learning to take place. So an example, last year I decided to try an engineering project of building a thermos. And in my class, this was new for me as well. It was a new project, and I told the students this, and it was a learning process for all of us. And as we were going through it, I would learn from them, and they would feedback, and I'd give them feedback, and it became that collaboration that supported them to grow. And if you ask those students what it was that allowed them to grow so well and to understand these concepts, it was the fact that they were allowed to fail and try again, and that we were working together. It wasn't I expect you to know everything at the end of this, and there will be a test that explains all the content. It was a growing, supporting.
It's more of a collaboration with equal partners.
Exactly. You're an
With
equal
you,
partner.
even though you're kind of nudging or pushing them
Yeah.
to another level, it's not like a top-down,
Exactly.
learn this right now. It's
Yep.
how do we talk about this?
Yep, and it's how you approach it. If you approach it as you are the expert, no one's going to want to listen. If you approach it as we're working together, you'll be fine.
And I think this really aligns with the math resource we bought last year, the Math and Focus program, because what I hear you saying is students are working together, and if they are able to complete the assignment or find the answer, it doesn't matter how they got there. And the same with math. There should not be, just only one way. The students shouldn't be taught there's only one way to do it.
Right.
Because you're not developing their thinking, you're not developing their ability to collaborate and ask questions of one another. So I think it's made a nice tie-in with science and the science and math. And, as we said, the next step will also be, teaching reading and writing, helping teachers in the content area understand that process.
Yeah, and the math practices line up well with the science and engineering practices, and we have the teachers looking at them now, so when they're planning their lessons, they can tie them both in on each side.
Not to get stuck on acronyms, because
Yep.
we always try to talk about that. You already talked about STEAM.
Yep,
Or
or STEM.
STEM. Now I want you to talk about STEAM.
Sure.
What's the difference?
STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. The arts component is important because when you are building a blueprint for engineering, you're still talking about art. It's art in different forms. And they're talking about the science behind it and integrating the arts. That's become a new term that we've included into the STEM. We feel it's important. It reaches more students, and it's less isolating of the STEM. Because when we're working with technology, there's an art to it. And when you're working with science, there's an art to that too.
So do you think, it's just a name, but that using the word STEAM
Yeah.
instead of STEM, will that change? And is it to remind us to be sure that arts are always included in our thinking, so it's a little more creative, a little more inclusive maybe?
I think it's the creative aspect that we're looking for. When I'm talking with science colleagues, we don't tend to use the word STEM as often anymore. We use the word STEAM. We've kind of veered away from it. However, a lot of our initiatives are STEM driven, and so you'll still see that as the acronym out there. But if you start looking into newer programs, they're focusing more with the arts because of that important aspect, that creativity, not just of the arts, but that mental creativity that it requires.
So really what it is to help our students develop their minds,
Yep.
critical thinking, in the area of science or any area,
Yep.
because one will build on the other, whatever subject. One other thing I wanted to talk about for a moment is some of the grants that
Yes.
we already have and that our students have been able to access. The one exciting day that we had together a few weeks ago was to go to Stonington to the New England Science and Sailing Academy and watch our students in kayaks and in sailboats. For many, and getting good instruction in both of those, amongst other things. And for many of our students, it's the first time maybe on the ocean or near the ocean and in a boat or a kayak. So talk a little bit about that grant maybe, or
Sure.
that opportunity, and then what the other opportunities might be for our students.
Great. So NES, New England Science and Sailing Foundation in Stonington, they work with our students to, the first part of it was the kayaking, the sailing. They're learning about force and motion and direction, and they're learning science concepts without actually being taught it from a textbook. They also went back into a lab and were able to work in the lab and look at some of the water quality and how that impacts some of the marine life in our local waters. So they were able to tie that all in together. NEST is important because these types of programs give our students opportunities they would never have otherwise. They go out into the water and they're able to see the importance of the water. By coming back, they now do the research that some of our scientists are able to do. Then in the classroom, NEST will now follow up, and the educators will follow up. They come into the classroom, and now they're tying into our curriculum. So they're actually supporting our curriculum that we have currently with programs that pertain to the water and what they actually experience. And they keep making those connections, so it reinforces some of the science content.
And you could see even the students who were a little fearful at the
Yeah.
beginning, and you could read it on their face, once they got out there, it was just a beautiful thing. So that will open up their mind to being able to do that kind of thing, but also to the scientific part of it.
It's empowering.
Yes.
I think students felt empowered because they were given this opportunity, and then they're able to take that empowerment and come back and own their thinking and develop it in the classroom, and also back when they go back to NEST.
And relate it to real world, something that they've experienced.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're solving real problems too. I mean, they're addressing actual issues that the researchers are looking at in Long Island Sound. They're looking at the lobsters and the low oxygen, and they're looking at that and saying, okay, what can we do? Our students are able to solve these problems probably easier than some of the scientists because we have been trained with a focus and out of textbooks, whereas they're given this opportunity to say, explore it, tell us what you think, and that helps the researchers too.
That's good.
When you look at the activity that they had, if they didn't have the sailing and the kayaking and, you know, talking about force and motion, they could still do it in the classroom with the teachers, you know, doing some kind of a hands-on activity, but now they have something to reference and to go back to and relate to because they actually did it.
Yep. And I think we all learn differently. So you have the students that learn better by doing the actual activity, or the student who might not be, you know, understand, well, what does this mean when I do this in the classroom? When you actually see, okay, well, when I move it this way, my boat's going to go this way. Well, why would that work? What am I pushing out of the way? I'm pushing some of that water. I'm causing some force. And then you're looking at the wind direction, and then you start thinking, well, what is wind? And that's a whole other, you know, questions that you can ask and develop, and they come back in the classroom. So you're engaging all sorts of learners.
So that was just one example of a
Yep.
great day
Oh.
in Stonington. What other grants might we share with our listeners?
Sure. We have one with the Southeastern Connecticut Science, our Children's Museum. They come to our 5th grade and they do a stars and labs. So they work with them on talking about the stars and the rotation, and they work with our Earth, Moon, and Sun, and they do a nice job with that. Kindergarten works on habitats, and they do building. So they talk about how do you build a strong habitat, what does that look like. That teaches some of the physical content, so we're learning about structure and how does structure and function form, habitats, ecosystems. It all ties in well.
Even to use those words in kindergarten
Yeah.
is probably a new thing. You know?
Yeah, and they're talking about building. You know, what does it mean to build, and why do we build with certain materials? We also have. We've used Project Oceanology in the past, and we're hoping to continue that partnership. We have one with Denison Pequapso Nature Center, where our students go out there and they do some activities. We are working with the Food Corps, and they work with our gardens at 3 of our schools, and they also come in the classrooms and work with the students. We have many
Yes.
grants in the district, and we're working to extend them too. We're fortunate to have many partners in the community that are willing to help us and develop those and enrich our community or enrich our education
For the
with these
students.
grants. Yeah.
That's great. Any other kinds of opportunities that we can bring in besides what we know or other people in our district know is certainly beneficial to our students.
We've been partnering with more scientists. We have a program going this year. It's it's a community program throughout the state, through the Connecticut Science Teachers Association, where our teachers were allowed to sign up and have a scientist connect with them. So we have them from all the way from 8th grade down. We have several teachers who've signed up for that, and they'll have scientists that come in periodically every month or so, and they do a lesson with the students. So we've been fortunate that goes across the district. I think the youngest was 1st grade, and it goes all the way up to 8th grade.
What really touches you about science? What makes you personally so excited about science because I know it does.
Yeah. So, as a student, as growing up, I found that science was a way to understand how complex our world was. I found the world to be very large and at times overwhelming, and I knew that if I could figure it out, like little bits, I was now putting together a bigger part of, you know, the big question: what is this? What does this mean? How do I approach this? My 7th grade science teacher, Mr. Parmalee, I remember him impacting my life in such a way. He expressed to me that I could do anything I wanted through science. And so we ended up building robots, and you know, he took us out and we were looking at frogs that were being impacted by acid rain. And I remember how empowered I felt as a learner, that I was able to research and learn and actually answer some of these questions, and that just because I was a 7th grader didn't mean that what I was learning wasn't relevant to the world around me. And as I got older, I found that that became just a stronger and stronger interest. And as I got through college, I worked with scientists and I found research interesting, and it drove my passion. And now I have 2 small children, and that's pretty much how we live our lives, is through science.
Exploration.
Exploration, it's that whole fascination. The world's amazing. And we can, you know, even if you solve small parts of it and you understand it, you feel like you have a solid grip on what's happening and how can you help it and solve it. I mean, it amazes me every day.
The part of one question starts another question,
Yeah.
starts another question. For someone who likes answers, and then to be done with a question, it's probably more difficult. But you have to have an open mind to know that it's okay to not have one answer and then it's over, that there are other answers.
But you feel like a little bit accomplished when you've solved that one part of it. Like, why does the flower look this color? And how is it that the sun does this? And, you know, all these little things are, why did that oil tanker implode? What is air pressure? What is air? What builds the earth? What builds us? How come, you know, certain foods act a certain way in my body? All that stuff is, you know, those are big questions, but once you solve the small ones, they add up.
Great. We have just a couple of more minutes. I wanted to add about the show that we have here. We are going to have a different topic every month, and we're so pleased to start the month and the year really with science, because it makes us all inquisitive and think, oh, what would the next show be? See, there's another question. Now I have more questions. And why? What other parting words that you would like to share?
I would like it if our families and district interviewers paid attention to the fact that we're going to probably start having some STEAM nights or STEM nights, depending on the school's affiliation, if they'd rather have it as a STEAM night. We are having those toward the spring, and we're trying to have also the Connecticut Invention Convention this year, so there'll be projects. And if you ask your students just from here forward, what does that mean, or what are you learning in science, and what does that mean when you're going outside of the classroom? Why are you learning that? Those questions will keep your child interested, but then you are also interacting.
Learning too.
Yep.
When you have these nights for families, will it be hands-on activities for them?
Yes, it's all hands-on.
All hands-on.
Yep.
So it's fun for the whole family.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Everyone's welcome.
So you're not giving them a textbook and sit down and read?
Read
Just
the
you.
vocabulary.
No, I'm just very happy that we've been able, through our grants once again, to have a science coordinator once again. There's just so many expectations nowadays, and teaching is much different, and learning is much different. And there's a lot of things to pull together, and science was an area where we felt a real need to do that, and so we're glad Sam applied and got the job.
Because your
Very
excitement
good.
is contagious, so I thank you for that.
Thank
And I
you.
thank you for your work in science.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.